Trump does believe that acts of a sitting president cannot be criminal. So in other words, from his perspective, as soon as he takes that office, he can act with impunity. Now, that is certainly not aligned with checks and balances and rule of law. I don't believe, and I think most of us don't believe, that we're about to experience a dictatorship in the United States. And yet there is a question of what kind of constraints, what kind of checks beyond the way that the president-elect happens to feel on a given day we should most be relying on, we should most be focused on as he takes office.
I had a version of this conversation with the now Vice President-elect J.D. Vance, and one of the things that he said was, of course, the president is reined in by the Constitution. Although I feel like one of the things we learned in Trump's first term is that there aren't any enforcement mechanisms in the Constitution. But beyond that, he said, a president should get to do the things that he wants to do and has promised to do. And I do think that voters broadly feel that a president ought to be able to enact the things and to do the things he has promised to do, of course, within the structure of the system, which requires you to go to Congress for some things and not others. But I think a lot of people are frustrated with Washington gridlock, with the feeling that our institutions are so sort of calcified and bottlenecked that they don't allow anything to get done. We can't build things, we can't create change, we can't really get anything moving in this system because there are so many veto points that have sort of grown, encrusted on the basic checks and balances guaranteed by the Constitution, that even a sitting president can't really make things happen. So I think there is a mandate for Trump to actually execute on his agenda.
Nicole?
There is really no difference, I think, in Donald Trump's mind between policy and self-enrichment. And so this idea that the president is pursuing his agenda and should have free rein to pursue his agenda, I think that does have a more popular support than I think many liberals and proponents of rule of law would hope. That's not unusual in the United States. I think there has been a kind of broad support for impunity for some parts of the government. And I think that Donald Trump is the beneficiary of a decades-long effort to try to prevent there from being effective tools of accountability. You see this in the 1980s with Iran-Contra, which ends in pardons and no impeachment, even though it involves a number of laws being broken by people throughout the government. You see it in the 1990s with the use of impeachment against Bill Clinton for something that Americans just didn't feel like was a crime, a high crime and a misdemeanor in any way, something that weakened the tool of impeachment to the point when it was used against Donald Trump on two different occasions, it proved to be completely useless as a tool of accountability. And I think that those tools of accountability have been so degraded and were so degraded by the time that Donald Trump entered office the first time, that he was already able to act with a kind of level of impunity that will only have accelerated when he comes back into office, in no small part because he's not just of the belief that he has impunity for official acts, but the Supreme Court has said just a few months ago that he does in Trump versus the United States. So, the idea that there are levers that can be pulled that will suddenly snap into place an accountability regime, those levers don't exist.